I'm Eugene Bingham.
I'm Adam Dudding, and this is Long Story Short. It's a podcast about crimes and catastrophes, scandals and scammers, secrets and lies.
Yeah, strange tales you've never heard of or new twists on stories you thought you knew. So let's get into it.
I'm going to set the scene. It's a Monday in mid-September 1994. We're in Nelson, which is top of the South Island, top of Te Waipounamu, New Zealand, middle one of New Zealand's 3 islands. There's an interview going on in the Nelson police station, and the guy being questioned has recently been arrested for a bit of a crime spree, really. There's a stolen car, there's a woman has been kidnapped and taken to an ATM and told to withdraw money. Also a robbery in which the coin dispenser has been taken from a taxi. So pretty serious stuff. But this guy, his name is Mikaere Oketopa, he's about to be asked about something much more serious still. The interviewing cop is Detective Sergeant Bernard O'Fagan, and O'Fagan took some notes, transcribing what was said, so we've got a pretty detailed idea of how this conversation went. There's some chat about whether Mikaere Oketopa wants a solicitor present or not, and then the important bit, so the cop O'Fagan, he says, actually, Eugene, can you be O'Fagan?
Sure.
We can role play this bit.
All right. Okay, I'll be straight with you. You've been identified as being with a murder victim shortly before her death on Saturday morning.
I don't know anything about that.
You've heard about the murder at Christchurch East School?
Yeah, of course. Papers, radio and that. What time did it happen?
About 2:30am Saturday morning. The body was found at 7:30am.
Who by?
A paper girl, 14 years.
The poor kid. That's awful finding that. I know exactly what I did that night. It's all in my head. I was with 50 people drinking at Littleton. Then I slept and went to town at 4 o'clock. So don't go trying to pin any fucking murder on me.
Don't get excited.
Don't get excited. So that's just a little bit of the interview. But we know that it went on for a lot longer. Mikaere Oketopa, who was in his mid-20s at the time, was interrogated for roughly 3 days, and there was no solicitor in the end, which is sort of interesting. And that initial answer, don't go trying to pin any fucking murder on me, well, looking back on that now, 32 years on, it starts to look a bit ironic.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, because you recognise that name, right? Mikaere Oketopa. Actually, he's changed it now. He goes by Mikaere Oketopa, which is essentially a te reo Māori transliteration of exactly the same name. We're actually going to call him both of those names, sort of depending on what name he's going by at the time, in the time frame that we're talking about. So Mikaere Oketopa, Mikaere Oketopa, his name actually isn't super famous in New Zealand, but people who are interested in miscarriages of justice are really familiar with his name. And there's every chance his name is going to become quite a lot more widely known, and we'll get to that later. But back in 1994, what's going to happen after that interview, some spoilers here, after that interview in Nelson Police Station is that Mikaere Oketopa will be charged with that murder at Christchurch East School, and he'll be convicted, and he will spend a long time in jail for it. And in this episode of Long Story Short, we're going to talk about how all of that happened.
Now, this episode is about a crime, a really awful one, a rape and a murder, but it's also about justice and the police and memory and, just quietly, race. There's a whole bunch of things. And we should mention right out of the gate, this episode unavoidably contains references to sexual assault and murder, so it's really not going to be suitable for all listeners. So let's get into the story of Mikaere Oketopa, the killer who was never there.
So we've got Mikaere Oketopa in that police station in Nelson, top of the South Island, Te Waipounamu, on a Monday in mid-September 1994. So, as we like to do, a quick context drop. What's going on in 1994?
Well, the US President is Bill Clinton. The UK Prime Minister is John Major. The New Zealand Prime Minister is a guy called Jim Bolger, and he used to be a farmer. The big New Zealand movies that year are Once Were Warriors and Heavenly Creatures. The big international movies are The Lion King, Forrest Gump, Mrs. Doubtfire, Four Weddings and a Funeral, and that one where Keanu Reeves is in a bus that won't stop.
Speed.
That's it. And the recent hit singles in the New Zealand charts are by Prince and Wet 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 and Boys to Men.
So, I think we're in the moment. We're in 1994. So, Michael Oketopa, Nelson Police Station. Why is he being asked questions about this murder that's happened a couple of days earlier in the city of Christchurch, which is more than 400 kilometres south of Nelson? So to answer that, we're going to have to rewind the clock a few days. So let's go back to Friday, September the 16th, 1994.
And here's what happened according to Mikaere Oketopa, and it's what he'd tell you even today. And it's not far from what he said to that cop in the interview room in Nelson at the very outset when we did our bad acting. So Oketopa says on Friday the 16th, he was drinking in Littleton. That's a little port town really close to Christchurch, like about 15 minutes drive away from the centre of town. He was drinking in a place called the Wunderbar. I have been there, with a couple of mates, Alan Taylor and Michael Green. And it's probably worth taking note of those names, so I'll repeat them, Alan Taylor and Michael Green.
Got it.
Oketopa had started drinking before lunchtime. He got pretty hammered. Then at some point, much, much later, all three of them drove into central Christchurch in a Ford Falcon, that's a car, belonging to Michael Green. And it was after midnight when they got to a place called Warner's.
Right, and for our benefit, we have a picture of Warner's. It's a reasonably lovely looking sort of stone building with lots of windows and lights and all those classic sort of things. It's a grand old hotel with a nice bar. It's in Cathedral Square, so right in the very centre of the city. Anyway, it's now 1 a.m, so we're into the Saturday, early hours of Saturday. And Michael Oketopa at that point, has passed out in the passenger seat and his mates can't wake him, so they leave him snoring in the car. Actually, I don't know if I'm guessing that he was snoring, but given how drunk he said he was, it seems likely. They leave him snoring in the car and go into Warner's on their own. And what happens next? Well, according to Oketopa and his mates, Alan Taylor and Michael Green, very little. He sleeps on in the car. Then sometime after 2:30 a.m, so it's like an hour and a half later, the other two come back to the car and they've got three women with them that I'm not quite sure details of who they are, but they've met them at the bar perhaps, and they all drive to a party.
After that, well, as Saturday dawns, things get kind of hectic for Michael Oketopa. From what we can tell, after leaving that party a few hours later, he's driven back to Littleton by his friend Michael Green. But then he returns to Christchurch. He tries to get into a club, but he's refused because he's wearing boots.
There you go.
Dress standards are very high in New Zealand's drinking establishments, clearly. So around 6 a.m, he finds a phone box and calls his cousin, who lives nearby, to see if he can borrow some shoes. And then, well, he goes on a bit of a crazy crime spree. And to be clear, nobody's really challenging this stuff. The various people affected and Michael Oketopa himself basically agree on all of these details. He kidnaps a young woman, a school teacher. She's not physically harmed, but still really serious offending. And then he takes her to an ATM to withdraw cash and steals her car. And I guess he took it for a really long drive because he's arrested on the Sunday in Motueka, which is a small town really close to Nelson and, look, a good 420 kilometre drive from Christchurch. Oh, and by the way, at some point he stole that coin dispenser from a taxi. Anyway, by Sunday, he's been arrested in Motueka. He's taken to the Nelson police station and they start interviewing him. So that's what Mikaere Oketopa says happened that weekend: drinking in Littleton, sleeping in a car in the city while his mates drink in a hotel, off to a party, an early morning crime spree, then a big drive to Motueka and Nelson. Pretty horrendous behaviour, but you'll notice not a word about a murder in there. But let's run through that evening's timeline again, this time tracking the movements of some other people.
Right. So, quick bit of context. Back in 1994, there was a night spot in central Christchurch, quite close to the Cathedral Square, called the Palladium nightclub. It was founded in the mid-1980s when really horrible spelling was very popular, so they spell nightclub N-I-T club, which
Speak about crimes.
upsets me. It's long gone now. And for our benefit, we have a picture here proving that it was apparently the first nightclub in Christchurch to include a full laser light show. And there are so many lasers in this picture. I don't know whether we're able to get that up on the YouTube version, but we'll see. Anyway, on that Friday night, September the 16th, 1994, a young woman called Anne-Marie Allens goes to the Palladium with a couple of her friends. Anne-Marie, the reports say, worked at a sweets factory. She was 22. Around 1:30 a.m., so early hours of Saturday the 17th. They're all leaving, but Anne-Marie gets separated from her friends. She has apparently drunk a lot and she's not in great shape. She starts walking home on her own. And at some point, she encounters two men in the street. Their names are Richard Genge and Samuel Kerner. Genge is 19 at the time. Kerner is in his early 20s. So where do these two guys come from?
Well, Richard Genge and Samuel Kerner are good friends. They're both unemployed. They've spent the evening drinking together. They've downed a few somewhere in Aranui, then continued boozing at the New City Hotel in the city centre. And just to be clear, New City Hotel's the name of the hotel.
Right.
So here's how Samuel...
new at all. It was like new in like 1943 or something.
Yeah,
anyway.
But that's what it's called. So here's how Samuel Kerner has described that evening. He says he and Richard Genge are drinking in Aranui, and I should have mentioned that's a suburb out to the east of the city of Christchurch, and then they're at the New City Hotel in the city centre. Kerner says he buys a bottle of Maguire's whiskey at the hotel, then around 2 a.m. they leave the hotel. He says they were merry but could walk unaided, and they start walking north.
Now, this is kind of tricky in a podcast, but if you can, it's helpful to draw a bit of a map in your head at this point, just to get some of the geography here. Because the most important parts of this story all happen within a really small area of central Christchurch, which, if you know it at all, is a grid city. It's got a really, rectilinear kind of street pattern. And everything sort of happens into a square that's about 1 kilometre by 1 and a bit kilometres. So draw in your head a sort of a grid of streets. Up at the top left corner of that square, that's the Palladium. That's the nightclub, spelled N-I-T club, where Anne-Marie Allens is with her friends until 1:30 a.m. Now move down the map. In the bottom left corner, more or less, is the New City Hotel, where Samuel Kerner and Richard Genge, these two guys, are drinking. Nightclub, top left. Hotel where they buy the whiskey, bottom left.
Got it.
So, Kerner and Genge, they then are walking north with their bottle of whiskey, like they're going up the map. And Anne-Marie Allens, she must have been heading south, like down the map from the Palladium, because Kerner says they bump into each other somewhere in the middle. The corner of St. Asaph and Colombo Streets, if you're a local and know the street names, roughly in the middle. Anyway, Samuel Kerner says they meet Anne-Marie at the street corner, and he says she crosses the road asking if she can have some of their whiskey, and they all get talking.
I just want to take a pause here and talk about the silent voice. So Anne-Marie. In cases like this, the accused get the chance to have their say, or at least have a lawyer say it for them. The prosecution puts its case, but often the victim is left without a voice, and they're certainly without representation in court.
And plus, once you're in court, basically something awfully like victim blaming, maybe unavoidably, but certainly often ends up part of how you defend a case, right?
Yeah.
So bear that in mind. But the version we're telling here is based on what Samuel Kerner and also Richard Genge themselves said later in interviews and in court. And in terms of the logistics of who was where and so on, this actually seems reasonably straightforward. There's not a lot to argue about here. But having said that, to be super clear, there are parts of what they say that actually you shouldn't believe, that no one believes. And we'll try to make clear which bits are believable and which aren't as we go along, if that's not putting the thumb on the scale too much. Anyway, the three of them, so they've now met up. The two men and the woman they've just bumped into, they then start walking together and they head northwards towards Cathedral Square, which is pretty much back towards the Palladium nightclub. So Anne-Marie's come down the map and then she's going back up. That's where she started. So she's turned around and heading back north with them. They get to Cathedral Square and then apparently they try to buy some cigarettes.
And Cathedral Square was where Michael Oketopa was asleep in the car, right?
Correct. But let's park that thought for the minute. Anyway, Kerner and Genge and Anne-Marie Allens then take a right. So we're moving right across the map and head east for a few blocks along Worcester Street, if you know it. And then they zigzag a bit up through a few different streets and they end up at a school. This is Christchurch East School. And we're now up in the top right corner of that 1K by 1K grid that I mentioned earlier. So sort of things happened on the three of those four corners. So Samuel Kerner says he and his mate Richard Genge and this woman they've just met, they all go into the school where they all sit down on a veranda and drink some more whiskey. In fact, the lid for that Maguire's whiskey will later be found at the scene. So this absolutely stacks up. It seems to be pretty reliable. And then, according to Kerner, Genge and Anne-Marie have consensual sex.
And this is one of those parts we said we're going to tell you. We've got to pause here. It's abundantly clear from lots of forensic evidence that this actually was not consensual sex. It's very clear that she was violently raped.
Yeah. That's one of those bits that simply can't be true. But back to Kerner's version, he says after Richard Genge had finished with the woman, he walks off and then that's Kerner, also has sex with Anne-Marie. Again, he says it was consensual, but there's very strong evidence that it really wasn't. In any case, Kerner says Genge returns while he's still having sex and starts punching him. That's Kerner in the head. Kerner says he stops what he's doing and then the two men scuffle. In court, Kerner put it this way, we had a pretty good fight. It started on the veranda. He started to get the better of me, so I left the school. Kerner says he then waits for Genge nearby, like quite close to the school, for 5 to 10 minutes. Genge then turns up on his own. The woman they've just met isn't with him. The two guys head home to Genge's place. He lives with his mother, and they still have their bottle of Maguire's whiskey with them, though not the lid, obviously. The next day on the radio, apparently, Kerner hears that a woman has been found dead at the school. He says he and Genge talk about it just once, and very briefly. Apparently, Richard Genge says to Samuel Kerner that, this is sort of a paraphrase, none of this would have happened if Kerner hadn't decided to also have sex with that woman they'd met. Apart from this, it seems they never discuss it again.
As for Richard Genge, his version is actually extremely similar to his mate Samuel Kerner's. So that's drinking together in the suburb of Aranui.
Yep.
Drinking together at the New City Hotel.
Yep.
Leaving the New City Hotel, bought the bottle of whiskey, the Maguire's whiskey, walked north, bumped into Anne-Marie Allens, and then all walked together to Cathedral Square, as it were. No school there. Then to the school, drank some whiskey.
Yeah.
And then just the same as Kerner told it, Genge says that he then had consensual sex with Anne-Marie. Yes, again, we can be sure it definitely wasn't consensual. He says he left, then came back and saw Kerner was having sex with her now, so he started attacking Kerner. Kerner stopped, they fought, Kerner ran off.
So their stories totally match up here. And they're both pretty self-incriminating stories, to be fair. So it's not like there's a lot of defending going on.
No.
Then, and for this next bit, there's only Anne-Marie and Genge there. And he's the only living witness to this moment. So we've only got his word for it. But Genge says Anne-Marie starts shouting at him for having just attacked Kerner. And then the murder happens. Richard Genge claims to have no memory of the brutal attack that follows, but the autopsy makes it very clear that he kicked Anne-Marie and punched her and smashed her head against the concrete until she died. No clear memory of that moment, he says, but he does remember realising she was dead and picking up his bag and picking up the bottle of whiskey and running off. So it's a truly grim story. Two drunk young men get talking to a drunk young woman in the early hours of the morning. They lead her to a nearby school. Each of them rape her because that's what the autopsy and the DNA evidence clearly show. And then one of them runs off while the other batters her to death. But there's one more version of the story that has a small but crucial difference. And it's this one that the prosecutors will present to a jury 1 year later in court. And in this version, there's one more man who's there that night.
So let's rewind a bit to tell this version. A lot of it's the same. Anne-Marie leaves the nightclub and walk south. Samuel Kerner and Richard Genge leave a pub and walk north. All three bump into each other somewhere in between, then walk together for a bit. They walk 4 blocks north, they walk through Cathedral Square, then walk another 5 blocks to Christchurch East School. But here's the vital difference. At some point on that 2-kilometre walk, they're joined by Michael Oketopa.
But Michael Oketopa was asleep in that Ford Falcon, wasn't he? Parked in Cathedral Square while his 2 friends had a drink in Warner's Hotel.
Yes, correct. But the idea in this version is that Michael didn't snore the entire night away. Rather, at some point, he woke up, got out of the car and joined Kerner and Genge, 2 people he had never met before. He joined them and their female victim on that walk to the school, and there, just like Kerner and Genge, Michael Oketopa raped her. Then the story is largely as we've already heard it. Anne-Marie is beaten to death by Richard Genge, then Samuel Kerner and Richard Genge, just the 2 of them, go on their way back to Genge's house, and Michael Oketopa, well, he seemingly peels off from his new Confederates, walks the kilometre back to Cathedral Square, gets back in the passenger seat of the Ford Falcon, falls back asleep, and is still there just where his mates Alan Taylor and Michael Green had last seen him when they bundle out of the Warner's Hotel with 3 women in tow, and all 6 of them head off to this party.
This sounds, I don't know, kind of unlikely, kind of odd.
Yeah, maybe. Though unlikely things do happen sometimes. But what makes this version of events so very odd is that both Samuel Kerner and Richard Genge say, and have consistently said for 30-odd years, that Michael Oketopa simply wasn't with them. They say they met him for the very first time in court when they were all being tried for murder. And sure, we don't have to believe 100% of what those guys say. After all, they both said that they'd had consensual sex with Anne-Marie Allens when that simply can't have been true. But all the same, at least with that, you can imagine a good reason for them to lie about it is the difference between the sex being rape or not rape. So it's directly in their interest to distort the truth and describe it as consensual. But lying to protect this complete stranger who randomly joined them in a terrible crime, why would they do that? Yet it's this final version of the story, the one where Michael Oketopa woke up, tagged along for a gang rape and murder with some total strangers, then goes back to his mate's car to complete his nap. That's the one the jury heard and accepted as the truth. That's the one that saw Michael Oketopa convicted of rape and murder and jailed alongside Genge and Kerner. It's the story that he's been trying to disprove ever since.
And yet, clearly this all sounds bonkers. And it would be entirely bonkers if it weren't for 2 crucial things. First, there was something that an eyewitness saw that made a big difference. And second, there was something Michael Oketopa said during the interrogation that started at Nelson Police Station the day after the murder, something he's probably been regretting ever since. Let's take a break.
Sure. So, where were we? It's September 1994 in Christchurch, and early one morning, the body of a young woman is found in a central city school. Within a week, 2 young men, Richard Genge and Samuel Kerner, admit they'd taken her to a schoolyard, that both had sex with her, which they claim is consensual, but other evidence shows that bit can't be true. Then while Kerner was out of sight, Genge beat her to death. But days before those 2 had been arrested, this other guy, Michael Oketopa, also became a suspect. Eventually, all 3 would end up convicted of rape and murder, even though Genge and Kerner insist they were the only ones there with the victim. And even though Michael Oketopa says he was 1 kilometre away, drunkenly sleeping in the passenger seat of a friend's car. So how did he become a suspect? Well, let's start with the discovery of Anne-Marie's body. Really early Saturday morning, a man walking past the school sees her body. As it happens, he's on his way to periodic detention, which is it's a kind of sentence you serve for only part of the week, the weekend, say, so you can keep your job and so on. We stopped doing it in New Zealand around 2002. But anyway, this guy, when he gets to periodic detention, he mentions to his warden that he's seen the body of this young woman. Also, Anne-Marie's body is seen by a 14-year-old girl on her paper run when she's walking through the school. The police get to work figuring out what happened to this woman, and eventually they find 3 different eyewitnesses who sound like they saw Anne-Marie Ellen shortly before she was murdered. What's weird is that while all 3 witnesses saw Anne-Marie, they gave different accounts of who else they saw.
So one witness said they saw Anne-Marie with Samuel Kerner just after 2 a.m. about 800 metres from the school. So that's a woman with one man. The witness said they saw the woman fall over and Kerner picked her up. There's no mention of anyone else being there. Another witness, they saw a group of 3 people, a woman and 2 men, around 2:30 a.m., so half an hour later. This was at a street corner several blocks closer to the school. And the witness, it's a man, was in his car and had stopped at some traffic lights. Again, in this account, it sounds like Anne-Marie was having trouble standing, and this guy saw the woman was on her hands and knees on the footpath, and then the men pulled her up. The witness said it looked suspicious and that they were being rough.
Call 111.
There was another witness, a woman this time. She told police she'd seen Anne-Marie at roughly the same place as the second witness, so the one who'd been stopped at the lights. And this woman eyewitness says she saw 3 men with Anne-Marie. So 3 witnesses, so she's seen with 1 man, with 2 men, with 3 men. And now this witness, this last one I'm talking about, this was on foot. So she got really close to the group, and her description of what she saw is pretty detailed. She says one of the men seemed to be pulling Anne-Marie by her wrists and she was resisting. She says Anne-Marie sat down and then lay down, and that one of the 3 men was trying to get her to her feet. This witness was anxious for the woman, so she kept watching just in case it was about to get ugly in some way. But then she got closer, and one of the 3 men said kia ora, and the witness said hello back. And the witness says at this point she actually felt less worried for Anne-Marie's well-being. This witness described the 3 men for police, especially the one who'd been holding Anne-Marie up. Now, that description became a computer sketch. From that sketch, the police put together a lineup of photos of 8 men, and one of those photos was Michael Oketopa. And it was Michael Oketopa's photo that the witness picked out. So, this looks really bad for Michael Oketopa, right? His photo's been picked from a selection of 8 options. And by the time the cop, Brendan O'Fagan, is talking to Michael Oketopa at the Nelson Police Station about the crime spree he'd been on, you remember the coin dispenser and ATM and kidnapping and car and all that, O'Fagan is able to give Michael that pretty bad news.
I'll be straight with you. You've been identified as being with a murder victim shortly before her death on Saturday morning.
Now, at this point, it's really important to note that Kerner and Genge haven't even been arrested yet. That'll happen almost a week later in a place called Mariura Springs, which is 190 kilometres north of Christchurch. It really sounds like they'd gone on the run. They've got camping gear with them, and when they're picked up, the arresting officer describes them as cold and wet, but compliant. In other words, when Michael Oketopa is arrested in Motueka on Sunday for all this other crazy stuff he did in the early hours of Saturday, Kerner and Genge aren't yet in custody, which maybe influenced the way things went from there. Now remember, like we said at the very top of the episode, the first thing Michael Oketopa says after Detective Sergeant Brendan O'Fagan tells him he was seen with a murder victim is, "I know exactly what I did that night. It's all in my head. I was with 50 people drinking at Littleton. Then I slept and went to town at 4 o'clock, so don't go trying to pin any fucking murder on me." And O'Fagan says,
"Don't get excited."
So, a simple denial of involvement and another bravura performance from Eugene. But then, as police keep asking questions, Michael Oketopa seems to change his mind. He starts to wonder if he might have been involved after all, but has lost the memory of it because he was so drunk. And this is a crucial moment. This is what opens the door to the prosecution's version of events, the one that will go to trial, be believed by a jury, and send him to prison. He says quite a lot to the police. When he's shown photos of Anne-Marie's body, he says, "I was the last person she trusted. Now look at her." He tells police that actually, yes, perhaps he was there at the school. He tells them that actually he too had sex with Anne-Marie and she'd consented. He says he doesn't know anything about what happened after that or the beating that left her dead, but he does say, "Why didn't I stop them?" And then his confession gets even more detailed. Police take him back to Christchurch and to the school, and there he points to a grassy area where he claims he had sex with Anne-Marie. He tells police that actually he now remembers hearing screams. He says after that he was picked up somewhere in the street by his mates Alan Taylor and Michael Green. Okay, so it's really feeling like an open and shut case now, right? A detailed confession from someone who's also been ID'd by an eyewitness who saw him really close up and even said hello. But not long after that, Michael Oketopa tries to take it all back. And here's how that unfolds.
So this is a few days later. Michael Oketopa is in custody and his friend Michael Green pays him a visit and talks to him about how he and Alan Taylor had left Oketopa asleep in the car while they drank at Warner's, and how Oketopa was still sleeping right there where they left him when they came back to the car and headed to a party. In that moment, it seems, Michael Oketopa starts to realise the story he's told the police really doesn't actually make much sense. So he tries to retract his story. He says his earlier confession had been a fantasy dreamed up in his head because he'd been filling in the gaps after police told him he'd been positively identified with a dead woman just half an hour before her death. And as other evidence comes in, it starts to look like Oketopa's retraction is pretty reasonable. There are bloody fingerprints on a drain pipe at the school, but the fingerprints are Richard Genge's only. There are 2 different DNA matches for semen at the crime scene, which match Richard Genge and Samuel Kerner, but there's no DNA that matches Michael Oketopa, even though his so-called confession included sex with her. That spot on the grass that Michael Oketopa pointed out to the police is where he had sex with Anne-Marie. That was about 10 metres away from the veranda where she died, and forensic evidence from her body and from the scene simply didn't support the claim that anything had happened on the grass there at all. Most importantly, and honestly, this is the bit that I still can't wrap my head around, when Genge and Kerner were questioned, they insisted that there had never been a third man there with them that night. They said they had never met Michael Oketopa. So you've got Michael Oketopa saying, "Whoops, I made up a story because the police seemed so sure I was there, but now I realise I must have made it up. Stop the bus." But it's too late. The bus is already moving too fast.
Like the one in the Keanu Reeves movie, I guess.
Like that one. And the case against Michael Oketopa just never stops. In February 1995, there's a pre-trial hearing for all 3 men. That's where a judge hears the evidence and decides whether there's enough there to take it to trial. And then just over a year after that, a horrible night at Christchurch East School, all 3 men go on trial for the rape and murder of Anne-Marie Allens.
Right. So when we were first thinking about doing this podcast, the idea is we'd tell one story per episode, long story short. But this episode has actually turned out to be so complicated that we're going to need 2 whole episodes. So that's just the end of part 1. We'll be back soon with part 2, this mystery of Mikaere Oketopa, the killer who was never there. We will hear what happened at the trial and the truly strange moments that followed.
This is Long Story Short, a production of Te Pūrongo Productions, presented by Adam Dudding and me, Eugene Bingham. Connor Scott is our producer, editor and engineer. Podcast artwork created by Phil Johnson. Theme tune by Anton Morgan. We're on all the usual podcast platforms and also on YouTube and everywhere else. So please follow, subscribe, give us 5 stars, and maybe even write a review. Hei konei, hei kona.